Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. And today's topic of discussion is education. On the conversation of education, I want to talk about making the choice to grow. So pivotal moments in our lives where we can choose to respond in alignment with our baser instincts, so we can choose to grow. And this isn't a point-in-time decision. This is oftentimes a process. When you make the choice to grow, then you give yourself the opportunity to rise above your circumstance, to rise above the situation that you're in, or to rise above different communities and relationships that you find yourself in. And so I am someone who believes in growth fundamentally. It's the choice that I have made. It's really how I navigate all of my life decisions, just whether or not my choice is really on figuring out like what do I anchor to that will enable the most growth for me. And so because of that, I can be really conscientious about the kinds of choices that I know are going to really propel my growth. And so growth can happen in ways that are very traditional and clear for us. So when we think about academic pursuits, when we think about career pursuits, we recognize that there's a bit of a linear progression to growth. Like you go to depending on the grade you're in, depending on the academic level that you're going to align yourself to, like we can see how we are really investing in our intellectual growth in that sense. And so when it comes to environments that are not necessarily so structured or so traditional, growth can be a little bit more convoluted because it's not necessarily going to be this pristine linear line. It's not going to be something that's clean, that's neat, that's necessarily organized and structured, but that doesn't mean that it's not good for you. And so when we think about life and how we are called to grow in life, I think it shows up very differently. I think it shows up in the messiest times that we experience in life. And so I want to talk about some of those periods and how, if it is the case that you're going through that period now, and if you are going through a period right now where you recognize that you're at a bit of a crossroads, where the choices you make and how you handle the situation is really going to dictate the next few years of your life. And I want you to really pay attention, because the choices that we make because the choices that we make in those pivotal moments really do matter a lot. And so one of the areas in my life where I've chosen to grow is in distress. And so we're going to experience distress in different levels throughout our lives, whether that's acute distress because we feel like we're in danger, whether that's distress because we're experiencing an existential crisis, whether that's distress because we're moving, we're experiencing something new because of work, because of life, because of our parents, depending on how old you are watching this video. I think that there is this sense of distress, and when you feel distressed, when you feel alarmed, when you feel like there's something that you need to do to quickly respond to the situation in front of you, whether that's imminent danger, whether that's change, whether that, however that translates, and you know what your situation is, if it is because you feel distressed, then often in distress you're called to grow. And so when I think about responding to stress, a lot of people kind of fall into panic and anxiety and worry. They allow themselves to feel crippled. And I think that it's okay to feel it's okay to have momentary periods of like panic and anxiety and worry, but ultimately you're in this life to respond and to align to yourself and to make sure that you do the best for yourself in situations where you need yourself, right? And so I'm someone who, though I myself would consider myself to be someone who could be a bit of a high-strung human being, I could be a little bit anxious, but when it matters most, when it is the case that I find myself in distress, I get really, really calm and really, really clear about how I want to move forward to preserve myself, to better myself. And oftentimes it is in those moments where I'm thinking about, well, how do I allow myself to grow through this really challenging experience where I recognize that every decision is very sensitive, like every decision really matters. Those are the situations that cause you to stretch, they cause you to grow because you're uncomfortable. When you're in a distressful situation and every choice matters, you're in an uncomfortable position, right? And that can be a situation that really does stretch you beyond your comfort zone. And if you're stretched beyond your comfort zone, if you're completely uncomfortable right now, and you're really not sure what to do, and you don't necessarily think that you have the skills to do the things that you need to do well for whatever it is that you've identified, then you're in a period of growth. You're in a season of growth, and the choices you make matter. So when I think about, well, how do I want to show up for myself? Like, do I want to align to my personal sense of convictions? Do I want to align to the character that I think that I have? And I think character is something that is really visible in distressful periods. I think we can all think that we're a certain kind of person when everything is great and we're not put under pressure or put through fire. But when you're put through fire, you maintain that character, where you maintain your choices in alignment with that vision of yourself. And you can say, like, my actions do align with how I see myself. My actions do align with how I want to see myself. Then that alignment in itself is as a byproduct of growth, because a lot of the times we see ourselves and there is a disparity between how we see ourselves and the development that is required to get there. But I find that distress is really a period that really bridges that gap between the desired self and us being able to attain that by stretching beyond our own personal capacities in those periods of distress. Another time where you are called to grow is when you are now responsible for the growth of someone else. And this can happen in so many different arenas. This could happen in your social circles, it could happen in your academic circles, in your career, where you're being looked at as the person who's really going to be the catalyst of someone else's growth. And sometimes this isn't necessarily a formal or hierarchical structure. This can just be a byproduct of how the chips fell. But when you're making decisions, recognizing that your decisions are impacting other people, and you're trying to align yourself in a way where you want to have a positive impact on the people around you, where you're not making decisions that are necessarily going to put them in distress. You're making decisions that are going to stretch them, but in a positive way. They're going to push them beyond their comfort zone, but in a positive way. They're going to help them build new skill sets. And that's really its own growth opportunity. When other people's growth is contingent on your decisions, that's a great responsibility to bear. And as someone who really believes in social entrepreneurship, and in my vision of social entrepreneurship, it's really about not only like preaching about autonomy, but it's about giving people the skills and the tools to be autonomous. And I feel like that's my call to growth, to make decisions that will enable other people to grow. Because if I have worked in training and development, if I have a background in cognitive science, I have a background in technical communications, and I can use that all to build models, to build education platforms, or to give people the education that they need to be autonomous, to be critical thinkers, and to make the right decisions for themselves. And sometimes if you lack the information that you need to make the best decision for yourself, then it's not your fault that you're not making the best decisions, but you need the people around you who are equipped and who have those tools to really align to the conviction of making sure that everyone has the opportunity to make the right choices for themselves. And I think that when it is the case that you're in a position where your choices will define the trajectory of someone else's growth, that is a huge responsibility. And if you take on that responsibility with care, then I think that that's a great opportunity. Another area that I want to talk about when it comes to growth that we don't really talk about a lot is through loss. And I think we can experience loss in so many different ways. We can experience loss by way of death of a loved one. We can experience loss by way of, having a transition in our lives that moves us away from standard of normal that we're now really far removed from. Like, there's so many different ways that loss can translate in our lives, and rather than allow ourselves to feel drowned by loss and by grief and by that process that we're all going to face multiple times in our lives, a cyclical process, we can choose to grow through it. Like, how do we extract the best out of the worst situations? Like, how can we show up the best that we can in the worst of circumstances? And I think that those are opportunities, or those are calls to growth that a lot of us take for granted, or we don't recognize that there's no growth opportunity in those moments when we make the choice to grieve in a way that aligns to our best selves, grieve in a way that enables us to get back on our own feet. And that is a choice, right? Even the way that we handle our emotions around grief, the way that we cultivate self-mastery in grief is a choice that we make. And so these are all choices that I think will define our trajectory by way of growth. And growth in these areas is messy. It's not this linear line. We can be growing upwards and then have a setback. We can have experiences where we feel like we're plateaued, or we feel like, we're stagnant, but that none of that means that you're done, right? As long as you're breathing, as long as you're waking up every day, you have an opportunity to pick up your feet and to try again. I think that it's important that we recognize that it's a responsibility to try again, and growth is a responsibility that each of us really need to align to. We're all leaders in our own right, and how that leadership translates is how we model, even for ourselves, how we are choosing to grow in specific situations or through specific situations. And so I want to come here and talk about that, because I think that growth is one of the common threads in our human experience. All of us are growing, not just like physically, but in our sense of morality, and our mentality, our mindsets around different things, and our emotional maturity. All of these areas in our life really do call us to grow, and I think that is a very beautiful thing. And so with that said, if it is the case that you are focused on growth, if you want to focus on self-mastery and all of the different ways that translates in life, cultivating those soft skills, then I suggest that you do join our live events. We do host live events at least twice a month, every month for the foreseeable future on our website, so definitely be sure to check that out. And these events are paid events, but if you do take a look at some of our package plans, then you can get a good deal on these events if you plan on attending more than one. So something for you to think about. We do also provide parent-child workshops, so this is an opportunity to really build a foundation around development for children. We don't think you can start young enough, and so these are modules that we feel are that carry the foundation of true leadership, and that's focusing on cultivating autonomy, self-efficacy, compassion, and self-concept. So if any of these are interesting to you, if I piqued your interest at all, then definitely definitely check those out. And if you're still here, definitely follow us, leave us a like, comment, and subscribe. And I look forward to chatting with all of you very soon. We'll talk to you later.